Welcome into another Key of David podcast. I am joined by my co-host, Trevor the Key Keys, and David the Lion Douglas. And we have another awesome young guy for you. We're starting to bring in some of the more youthful guys. We've got a guy named Latter-day Chad. He's an LDS influencer, has a pretty popular account on Instagram called Latter-day Chad, where he posts a variety of things, LDS content related. You've seen him on Ward Radio and some other shows. So Latter-day Chad, welcome to the show, my man.
Hey, how's it going? So what we were going to be talking about mostly today is the Deuteronomist reforms, right? And
tell us a little bit about who you are. Before we jump into that, how, you're a young guy, how did you get going down, this deep doctrinal path?
Well, growing up, I sort of went over this on Conversion to Christ podcast, if you want to watch the full thing. But growing up, my family was LDS, and I just sort of thought it was all very lame stuff. But I always believed in spiritual things because when I was a teenager, I would have visions of the future sometimes that kind of freaked me out a lot, but I always believed there was something, right? I believed in sort of new agey manifestation type stuff based on the dreams and things I'd have. One time when I was 15 or 16, I believe, I remember this was when I started having those type of experiences. I had a dream where a classmate of mine passed away, right? Very tragically in the dream. And I woke up freaking out, convinced it was real. It wasn't even someone I knew super well. It was like a friend of a friend. And then 2 weeks later, it actually happened, the same way in the dream. And it just really freaked me out to the point where for my junior year of high school, I just didn't end up going because I was figuring that stuff out. And I was just homeschooled, right? So I always believed in that sort of stuff. I just kind of thought the religious stuff, I guess what I'd call now the sort of Protestant culture of Mormonism in Utah, it's just very cheesy, But as I got more and more into sort of spiritual things in my life, and I became convinced there was a God, just looking at the evidence, I became convinced there was a devil and that the devil's real. I kept receiving signs that led me towards, the Book of Mormon being true, and I kept rejecting it. I was like, there's no way.
What age is this and what year? Give us some context.
So this was after I graduated. So all that stuff started happening in my youth when I'd, have dreams of the future, and sometimes it would instruct me to do certain things, or I'd hear a voice that would tell me to do something specific, or that a specific person was about to text me and it would happen, right? So after I've graduated, I'm going through this sort of phase between
graduated high school, right?
Yeah, so this was around between the ages of 19 and 22. I'm having these sort of experiences where I'm exploring things spiritually, trying to figure it out. And then that's just sort of when I start being led down that pathway.
And you did not serve a mission?
No. I mean, if you want my honest, blunt opinion, what would go through my head in my youth, it was even if I believe this stuff, I don't want to be one of those guys, right? I just look at the in a white suit and tie stuff. It's I don't want to be that. I mean, I respect people who have good morals.
Just not your vibe.
Yeah, exactly, right. I also in Utah, it stood out a lot to me that the sort of ex-Mormon culture to me was more extreme than the Mormons, where it's I don't really vibe with the Mormon stuff either. I never have, but I don't have anything against it. You do you, right? I don't care what Joseph Smith supposedly did. And as I began having these sort of revelations, for example, I had a dream. In that dream, I saw the Book of Mormon I received when I was 8 years old or something. I never opened it up, never read it. It had my name written in really neat handwriting. I have messy handwriting. It wasn't mine. It was by leaders. I haven't seen that book in years. In the dream, I see that Book of Mormon. And then when I wake up, I was at my mom's house. It was right outside my bedroom there, right? This Book of Mormon that I hadn't seen in years, and it appeared to me in a dream, right? I had another experience that I've talked about. Maybe it would be better to tell this story another time, where a video that Glenn Beck did talking about.
Tell this story. This is a great story. I've heard it before on another podcast, but I want our audience to hear this.
Well, basically, Glenn Beck shared this story around a year ago. This is when I'm freaking out over Illuminati conspiracy stuff, like the devil's real. I can't believe this stuff is real. I'm freaking out, and I keep getting signs leading me towards the church, and I sort of oppose it. Like, these guys, like President Nelson, he's not doing anything about the Illuminati. He's not doing anything about these Satanists. This stuff is real, but we're just sort of hearing generic preachy stuff. So I see this Glenn Beck video where he describes essentially a vision he had. He had an illness that made it so he didn't have dreams in that time span. He had one dream. Someone who he describes as a religious leader calls him, says that he wants to speak to him, right? This got me thinking this could be a leader of the church, because I know Glenn Beck's LDS. The night before he sees that leader, has the same vision again, this warning essentially about secret combinations. And then he sees, again, he has that same vision. He goes and sees the guy the next day. The only thing that religious leader tells him is basically, I know about that dream. God communicates to us through dreams sometime. Don't forget that. That was from God. That's sort of a summary of that. So me, in the midst of this sort of confusion, and not wanting to believe Mormonism is true, but being open, having a genuine open heart to know what is true, I pray and I ask God to know who that was, to understand the meaning of that dream. And then I was shown a dream where I saw many people in the church, and I was trying to warn them against these secret combinations, these evil things, and they're blind to it. They don't see it, right? They're drunk and they're blind, which, later reminds me of Isaiah 28, the drunkards of Ephraim. And we know Ephraim is the Latter-day Church, right? And then a man appears to me in, I've sent a photo, I believe, of what it looked like before, an AI-generated photo. It was a man in a white suit with a white tie, like temple clothing, and he was sort of glowing. And then he tells me certain things about the devil. He gives me certain personal warnings for my life, and I recognize him as an apostle, someone who I hadn't thought about in years, someone who has passed away, and he looked much younger than he did in his lifetime. I mean, recently, he looked like he did like 30, 40 years ago or something, like he had grayish hair. He was kind of had a light glow. He tells me these things, and then the devil appears. He tells me this person is Satan. It was a muscular man with long blonde hair. He didn't really have clothes on, which I find out is temple symbolism later with losing the garments of glory, but that's another discussion. And that man kind of cuts off the vision. But this apostle, I find out a year later from multiple people who know Glenn Beck, was the man who spoke to Glenn Beck in person. So I prayed to God, is the church true? Is this person who spoke to Glenn Beck one of your apostles? Are there actually prophets on the earth? Right? And then in that dream, the person who guided me through that dream was that apostle. And going based off of that guest you had on the other day that was talking about how to have ministering angels and stuff, it seems like when you ask a question, the angel or the spirit that comes is someone who can answer that question. So I ask, was that person a prophet of God? So it confirmed to me a couple things. Like, in my online circle of, like, I guess, esoteric Mormonism, I run into a lot of people who are a variety of things. Like, a lot of them will be like, remnant movement types or snufferites that believe, the modern church is apostate or somewhat apostate. And what it showed to me in that vision is some of those criticisms are true, but there are, in fact, modern prophets. That man who spoke to Glenn Beck was a prophet, and he appeared to me when I asked God, right? So I find that out a year after I have that initial vision, right? And when I'm speaking to this person who knows Glenn Beck, I straight up ask, was it that guy? And I find out, yes, from multiple people confirmed it was that man who appeared to me. So I've never been, I've never been.
So was it after that point that you said, okay, I'm gonna dive deep into this. I'm gonna take the Book of Mormon serious. I'm gonna. Is that when you got active in the online LDS content community? Like, is that kind of how it went for you?
It was a gradual decline after that, where like I kept going back and forth trying to make up my mind, because when I initially had this vision, I didn't know that this was 100% true until a year later. I knew the feeling of it because I've had visions of the future and stuff before. I know that spiritual feeling of a dream that's going to come true, of one that has spiritual significance, which is why I knew when I asked the guy, was it that person that spoke to Glenn Beck? I had a feeling. But I did sort of go back and forth for a while. I just wanted, like, it's a funny story, but I just made my meme page as sort of a joke, because we were going to mess with one of my friend's moms who was paranoid of him getting involved with like Desnats or something online. And we were going to be like, oh, I'm friends with one of those people, and make a fake page. And I used an anti-Mormon meme of Joseph Smith with the big chin, like saying all this wild stuff as my profile picture, just to be funny, where the meme idea was basically just like, the first initial meme was, it shows Martin Luther, and he's like, I'm right because my interpretation of my version of the Bible that removed 7 books and blah, blah, blah says this. And then Joseph Smith with the big chin, it's like, I'm right because God told me, right? And that's sort of what I do think, and this is deeply involved with the Deuteronomist stuff. I can say pretty confidently, this stuff is one of the most relevant things if we actually want the sealed portion.
When you say Deuteronomist, there's a lot of people that have no idea what that even is. What is a Deuteronomist? What does that even mean? Explain it as though somebody for the very first time is hearing about a Deuteronomist.
And hey, as we go on, didn't you go on Ward Radio and talk about this Deuteronomist stuff?
I talked a little bit about it. So I more so talked about specifically the deity of Christ as Jehovah of the Old Testament, and how we have the real Jesus, and how, for example, in John 1:1, the Logos in Jewish definition at that time, it refers to the firstborn Son of God who acted as his instrument in creation. That is what John 1:1 is saying. The Word was God, and the Word was with God. That's saying the firstborn Son of God was the Creator, right? And that sort of begs a question that goes into our concept of the Father and Son being one God, because we don't believe in the Nicene Trinitarian way, but one thing I've often said is, from another point of view, we kind of are Trinitarian, right? We do believe they are one God. We don't believe that they are one substance, because who's the creator? The man who organized the plan for the universe, or the one who obeyed his will, was given all authority by him, and was the actual hand it was created by? They are one. They are united as one, right? So it's not like a polytheistic pantheon. It's more of a monarchism or henotheism, which is a hierarchy with a most high God, the Father, at the top. But that does go into, so what is the Deuteronomist reforms? Well, you have to backtrack 60 years or so. I'm not going to go super in depth about all the evidence and everything about it. I will put a link to a podcast that I did with author Dave Butler in the comments or in the description or something, that he goes really in depth about it. But essentially, it's this. It is the general scholarly opinion for a long time that there have been some heavy alterations to the Bible, specifically the Old Testament. And we have proof of it, right? It is any biblical scholarship thing you go to, Biblical Scholarship 101, they talk about the Deuteronomist reforms. They talk about these alterations from the Old Testament. And you know what? I have some quotes, actually, because it is our opinion now, those of us in studying this temple theology, that much of the things that were altered and removed had to do with Jesus Christ. And even the church fathers of the Catholic Church, they noticed a lot of these alterations, and they said, no, they tried to remove Jesus Christ from the Bible, and they traced it to the time when Lehi left Jerusalem, to the exile. They're like, oh, the Jews say it was Ezra when they came back from the exile. And that's why there are these text variations, because we have the Masoretic text, we have the Greek, we have the Dead Sea Scrolls, we have the Samaritan Old Testament, which differs in many ways from the Hebrew Old Testament.
We got the Nag Hammadi now.
Oh yeah, the Nag Hammadi has so much super Mormon temple theology stuff in it. Teachings of Sylvanus talking about knocking on the door to enter into the way of the tree of life, the mother and the father, all this stuff. Super crazy. It's all connected. And the Deuteronomist reforms, understanding that is a point to understand these greater things, to understand the endowment.
Let me ask you this. For anyone who went on a mission and you teach about the great apostasy, you discover the Council of Nicaea, and then the further, reforms after that. And we've understood those as like, hey, they all got together, all of these bishops, and they clipped and cut certain doctrine, changed things. And from that point on, we've had that. You're saying before this, the Jewish rabbis or whoever was in charge of the writings took the Talmud, the original stuff that even has the oral traditions, and they changed and did a similar type.
Yeah, I'm saying not only did that happen, but we have the proof it happened. It is, most biblical scholars agree on it. Even like Christian Trinitarian scholars are forced to believe on it. This is something you can edit into the video. If you just scroll through YouTube, you can look up the two gods of Israel, Yahweh and El, Yahweh and Elohim, Jehovah and Elohim, whatever it shows up on. The general scholarly consensus is that the Holy One of Israel. Now, when Isaiah says Holy One of Israel, you have to understand that the Holy Ones were the words for the sons of God. So when Jehovah is called the Holy One of Israel, he's being called the Son of God who is over Israel, right? The sons of El. So El Elyon, El Most High, is who we would now refer to as Elohim in the temple, right? He was known as the Father of gods and the Father of Jehovah originally. And we have multiple text variations, one of which even maintains in the Bible now, where they are distinguished from each other, and one is a father and another is a son. We have a lot of non-canonical texts that were omitted from the Bible that show it. And we have the text variations of things that are older that show it was altered. For example, I sent on Instagram to all of you guys a clip from Dan McClellan, which kind of summarizes one of those examples, which is in the Dead Sea Scrolls, Deuteronomy 32:8, which in the Dead Sea Scrolls version, it describes El Most High dividing up nations to his various sons. And then he gives Israel to Jehovah, right? So in that, and there's also Psalms 89:6, which is very interesting because not only does it identify Jehovah as one of the sons of God, and this is in our modern Bible, if you look up the Hebrew, it's there too. It says, who among the sons of God can be compared to Jehovah? Who among the holy ones, the assembly of the holy ones, can compare to him? So that's the divine council, the premortal council it's talking about. And it goes on about how great Jehovah is. It also identifies Jehovah as the one who sits on the throne of David. And then God says to David when he sits on the throne, I will make you my firstborn. So when David sits in the place of Jehovah in Psalms 89:6, David is taking upon himself the name of Jehovah, right? It is an endowment ceremony. The Melchizedek priesthood, which it's mentioned in the New Testament, it's mentioned in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Weirdly enough, it's almost omitted from the Old Testament, even though it's the entire order the Messiah was supposed to come from, weirdly enough. And that is, again, on the Deuteronomists. It is the royal priesthood of the priest kings, which they were anointed.
Why did they edit out, do you think, Melchizedek from the Old Testament?
Well, the Melchizedek priesthood, it is the religion of Abraham. So with these alterations, what the common theme seems to be, it is secularizing the religion for political views. And it seems to have Assyrian influence because the Assyrians, they would influence other cultures to secularize the religion in that same way to seize power, right? So the books that scholars say are forgeries are, it is the Deuteronomistic literature. So it is Deuteronomy, which We already have a fragment of Deuteronomy that we know has been changed. We also have Jeremiah straight up calling it a forgery, but we can get to that later. Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. And then various parts of other books in the Old Testament seem to have been written by these people. For example,
when you say forgery, what do they mean by that? Like forger of the original record, like just pure made up garbage? Like what are they defining as forgery?
If you ask atheist biblical scholars, their opinion will be it is complete garbage that is made up. I'm of the opinion it was altered based on Jeremiah's statement. So in Kings, supposedly, King Josiah finds a book of the law in the temple. So if you look at the Chronicles history and the Kings history, they go against each other. These books were written by different people and they oppose each other. But in the Kings history, King Josiah, he was like 12 years old, by the way. I like to poke fun at King Josiah and blame him for his stuff, but he was very clearly a political tool for these outsiders that were seizing political control. So he institutes these reforms. Basically, the idea is the kingdom is idolatrous, which I think it may have been a little bit, but a lot of the things which scholars, so most notably Margaret Barker, so aside from the church fathers, if you want to pull up those quotes I had about them talking about the Old Testament being altered, before anyone accuses me of idolatry, right, I'd like to show that even the earliest Christians were saying the Old Testament was altered to remove Jesus. So do you have those quotes from the saints?
David, you know where those are, right?
I have, I don't think that was included.
It was the most recent text I said. So,
okay.
it was like,
real quick right now.
Yeah, one was like by Saint Jerome and was another by Athesian. I don't know how to pronounce the dude's name. Half these Greek dudes.
Yeah. I have one by
Yes.
Yeah, that's the
Eusebius.
one. That's the message. So those two quotes, one by Eusebius and one by Saint Jerome. For I have proved that they have altered many things which were written of old openly in the sacred scriptures, where it was clearly and manifested and prophesied that Jesus, of whom we preach, would come. That's the whole quote. There's another one from Saint Jerome that traces these alterations to the exile, which is when the modern biblical scholars are saying the reforms happened. So the common theme is secularization under the guise of idolatry, right? There was probably actual idolatry that went on, but there's also certain things like Deuteronomy 4 outright says it gaslights the reader into saying that Moses never saw God. So in Exodus, what happens in, I forget what verse, I sent the references for it, Moses and the elders of Israel, they go up on top of the mountain and they see Jehovah face to face and they eat dinner with him. So they have a meal with Jehovah. Exodus 33:11, God explicitly, it says he saw him face to face. In, I believe it was Exodus 27, it might have been, where all the elders are there. They see Jehovah's feet. They see his form like unto a man. Deuteronomy 4:12 outright says Moses did not see God. It outright says it, and it says, if anyone claims that they've seen God, that is a path towards idolatry, and they will be killed. That's a very common theme with the book of Deuteronomy, which is the book of the law Josiah found, right? Is that it very clearly threatens to kill people for things. So, for example, Deuteronomy 13:1-5 says that prophets who claim that they have visions that will say like false beliefs about Jehovah or other gods or whatever it is, they are to be put to death, even if their prophecies come true, right? So even if their prophecies come true, if it goes against these more secular things, they can't do it. And from the start of the Book of Mormon, you start to see that the Book of Mormon takes place in this sudden time period. Lehi and Nephi are immediately doing things that the Book of Deuteronomy, which again, scholars say it's a forgery, Jeremiah says it's a forgery, bans. So Deuteronomy 29:29 says that you cannot know the secrets or the mysteries of God, which refers to the ordinances done in the Holy of Holies of the temple. Nephi, he says that knowing the mysteries of God, he seeks revelation. Now that's what the endowment is telling you to do. It is giving you a guideline to seek revelation, to seek further light from Father. the recent changes make it very clear that this isn't just a final judgment scene. It is teaching you how to discern spirits, how to seek further light and revelation from Father, right? So Deuteronomy 29 straight up says, if you seek the mysteries of God, that's one of the things that they'll punish you with for death. Nephi, right away, he says, I, Nephi, knowing the goodness and mysteries of God, blah, 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 you know? And then in Alma, throughout the Book of Mormon, it stresses religious liberty, right? So let me ask you something. Do you think that Alma, who he talks about when Korihor is persecuting the people, that there was no law saying that you have to believe a certain way whatsoever, is of the same religion of those who, if you believe in different gods, if you believe in a different idea about God, not even just different gods, if you believe that Jehovah has a body, you will be put to death. All right, Deuteronomy 13 straight up says, if your family members are worshiping differently than you, to stone them, right? Deuteronomy 13 says to stone prophets who have visions of these things. Deuteronomy says to kill any prophet who claims to have visions of beings like the stars in heaven. And what does Lehi first see?
A vision.
A vision of God sitting upon his throne. So he sees God in the form of a man sitting on a throne. And then he sees one descend out of heaven after him, and 12 others follow like stars. That right there would have been enough for these reformers to kill him. Now,
Well, it's probably why they threatened to kill him and chase him out of town when you go back and you look at the text.
Hey, why does it sound like our day? Anybody who comes out and says that they've had any kind of experience, it's like we want to just stone them and run them out of town. But we stone them differently. We don't use rocks. We use words, and we use it in the comment section.
Absolutely.
Media.
Same thing. It's the same thing in Joseph's day too. Like, you know, Joseph comes out with something new, and then you got
tarred and feathered. I mean, is probably like the stoning. Yeah. So clearly, it's been ingrained in us to do what Deuteronomy is suggesting. If somebody does come out and say they've had a visitation or a vision or an angelic experience.
You want to know something interesting? Straight up, I've had a Jewish person that was in a group chat with me tell me that the reason he can't believe Jesus is the Messiah is because of the book of Deuteronomy. Because here's two things that Deuteronomy bans as well. So it says God cannot have a body. So if Jesus is God, he can't have a body. 2, it says that one man cannot atone for another's sins. And that is what he cited for me for why Jesus cannot be the Messiah. Now, those are some pretty specific things to appear in a book that is, you know, a forgery at the time period where the distinguishing factors between El Elyon and Yahweh, the Father and the Son, are blurred, right? The general scholarly opinion is that a bunch of the verses in the Old Testament that refer to Yahweh originally referred to El Elyon. So there was originally that distinguishing thing, right? That's why you also see these sort of variations where Genesis 1 talks about Elohim creating man and woman in their image. And then Genesis 2 talks about Elohim Yahweh creating man and then creating woman from the side of man.
So Genesis is not in alignment with Deuteronomy.
Yeah, I mean, it's all out of alignment. If the Old Testament doesn't make sense, it's because there are different competing voices. For example, the history, Chronicles and Kings are not religious books. They are historical books. And I would say Kings is more so a historical propaganda to justify persecuting the people who believed in this more esoteric religion, right? To say, like Jews today many of the more extreme Jews will call Christians idolaters, citing Deuteronomy, right? So you don't think that, you know, someone who believed in more of a Mormon form of Christianity would have been persecuted back then? Of course they would have. Right? So when it talks about other gods in Deuteronomy, sure, it may have been Baal worship. That being said, I don't think that Baal worship was a big of a deal in the Old Testament as it's made out to be, because if you actually research who Baal is, it is essentially an apostate form of Yahweh or Jehovah, right? Like there's literally a story of Baal dying and resurrecting from the dead and ascending to the throne of his father, right? And you find that in all cultures. So it's basically a false version of Jesus, which is also what the golden calf was. So here's a little interesting thing.
Okay.
So the golden calf, you know how Joseph Smith said it was about them rejecting the Aaronic priesthood for the Melchizedek priesthood? I mean, the other way around, rejecting the Melchizedek for the Aaronic. Well, they say in Exodus, this is the God who brought us out of Egypt. Now, who's the God who brought them out of Egypt? Jehovah, right?
Jehovah. Yeah.
In the Paleo Hebrew, where all of the letters are kind of symbols, the name El, the name of God, do you know what it looks like? A bull. A bull was the symbol of El, and the letter for El was a bull. So what is the son of a bull? A calf, right? So this is an idol that is meant to represent Jehovah, because we know Jehovah was the son of El. He was symbolized by a calf. In fact, there's references all throughout the Old Testament that suggest the throne of the Davidic king actually had a calf on it, which goes back to the Psalms 89 thing, where when David sits upon the throne, he is seen as Yahweh on earth, which is foreshadowing the true Davidic king that would come, Jesus Christ, right? He was the representation of Yahweh on earth, and then Yahweh himself would come. That's why the New Testament, when it recreates the Day of Atonement, says no substitute was used. But the calf is a symbol of the Son of God, and they're worshiping this false idol of the Son of God, rather than going up to the mountain to see the face of Jehovah themselves with the elders of Israel. They are down there with a false idol saying, this is the God that saved us from Egypt, and doing all sorts of degenerate things, justifying it by Christ. Think about that.
Gotcha. Tell me a little bit about Margaret Barker. Who is she? You used her name. Who is she? And what kind of contributions has she made to this, enlightening people as it relates to Deuteronomy?
Well, like I said, I'll sort of divide things up between, what's a fact, what's sort of some people's opinion, and what's my opinion. So the Deuteronomist reforms, it's a fact. We know the text was altered in that time period. There are entire sections of, for example, Jeremiah that has nothing to do with the narrative of Jeremiah, but fits in with Deuteronomy and Kings. And then when they read the Hebrew of it, it is written in an entirely different form of Hebrew that is much later than when Jeremiah was written. And the language of it fits Deuteronomy. And, Jeremiah talks about people altering the scriptures as well, interestingly enough. So it's obviously not by Jeremiah. It's by someone much later and has nothing to do with what he's talking about. It's the same with other passages. I'd say Isaiah is one of the better ones. Interestingly enough, another thing they removed, and we can do a whole video on this. I don't want to go too in depth this time, but the wife of God was also removed. The wife of God was symbolized by the tree of life. And
so Heavenly Mother was completely taken out of the scriptures entirely.
There's little fragments. So if you look at Proverbs 3, it talks about wisdom. So in the Gnostic Gospels, a little bit in the New Testament, but very explicitly in Gnostic and Apocryphal Gospels, wisdom is the name of God's wife, right? So in Proverbs 8, next, apologists of Trinitarianism and whatnot, or Judaism, will say, oh, this wisdom is just the feminine aspect of God, which is true. It's the feminine aspect of Elohim, his wife. But it talks about wisdom, is a tree of life. And it actually has a pun on the name Asherah, which is either an explicit name for Heavenly Mother, because it was a name that is associated, that was seen as the wife of the god, or it's just a generic term for goddess, right? So Asherah may not be an actual deity. It may be a name. I think that Shaddai is more likely the name of Heavenly Mother. We do have in Deuteronomy them accusing, Deuteronomy 32 again, they accuse the Israelites essentially of, if you read the Hebrew, of worshiping a demon named Shaddai that they thought was a goddess. But then throughout the entire Old Testament, whenever Shaddai, which is falsely translated as God Almighty in the modern Hebrew Bible, anytime Shaddai shows up, it is fertility blessings. And Shaddai more likely is translated as the breasted God or the nurturing God, which it can mean both. So you'll have passages where Shaddai, the breasted one, comes and gives blessings of the womb and breasts, right?
Have you heard Michael B. Rush get into this at all?
Not really. Does he talk about this?
He's got a whole entire chapter in his first part of the Enoch that talks about Ashtar and the mother goddess, and he makes down the case that it is a fallen angel that they were all worshiping, and ties a lot of this stuff you're saying. I'll send you the chapter. I was curious if you've heard anything else.
Well, it's very interesting. So I take the side that Asherah is not a proper name. It just means goddess, because it seems to be associated with various deities who are not always the same deity. So when it's associated with Israel, the symbol that they find is, and we can go more in depth in this, is a nurturing mother with breasts who is portrayed in a tree. And then we have, 1 Nephi 11, the tree of life is very explicitly compared to Mary. Nephi, he sees the vision of the tree bearing the fruit, and it's white, and it's beautiful, and he asks, what's the meaning of this tree? And the angel shows him Mary giving birth, right, to Jesus, and says very explicitly, here's the line that matters. This is the mother of God after the manner of the flesh. And then he asks, now do you know the meaning of the tree? And then, again, wisdom, who is seen as God's wife. So there's various titles, and it's very possible that these different feminine deities, Asherah, Shaddai, Sophia, wisdom, it's all kind of mixed together, but it was actually different goddesses, right? So we can't really be sure. But so to be safe and not be an idolater, it does seem like anything negative about Asherah in the Old Testament was added later. Like when Elijah is facing off against the priests of Baal, it's just the priests of Asherah are kind of put into the narrative, and then they never do anything, and there's never any resolution. So it's like, we don't like Baal, let's put Asherah in there, right? So we don't really know. And again, my opinion is that Asherah just means goddess, right? That's sort of my opinion, is that it's my Asherah, it's my goddess, because the root word of it is actually found in the passage about wisdom, the tree of life, God's wife, in Proverbs 3. There's a pun on it. There's also a pun when Lehi sees the tree, where I believe it's pronounced Asira, which is the root word, and it means to make one happy. And what does your wife do? They make you happy, right? So that seems to be the root word for it, but we're really not sure, right? So
well, and even in 1 Nephi 11, it talks about the tree representing the love of God. And when you think about the way a mother loves is totally different than the way a father loves. And so when I read 1 Nephi chapter 11, and it's talking about the tree, it is definitely, to me, talking about a female mother. Well,
here's another thought. It is God's love. It is God the Father's love.
That's a really interesting. Yes, it is God's love. How about that? Yeah, totally. That's really cool.
The tree is very explicitly drawn a parallel to the Virgin Mary. Now, I know people who think that Mary is literally the incarnation of Heavenly Mother. I'm not saying that. I am saying, though, in that time period, there was a goddess who was symbolized by the tree of life, who Proverbs 3 speaks about as being wisdom. Her name is Wisdom, right? She's spoken about in the Gnostic Gospels. In fact, teachings of Sylvanus from the Nag Hammadi Library talks about returning to God your Father and wisdom your mother, and knocking on the door to enter the Holy of Holies through Jesus Christ and enter into the presence of the tree of life, and all this very Mormon stuff. It talks about being dressed in garments of glory and taking off the garments of sin, becoming divine, awakening, remembering your divine nature. It's very clearly an endowment text. And wisdom is God's wife in that text. Wisdom also at times seems to be about Christ as well. So Christ being born from the mother is wisdom. Christ being born from the Father is God. interestingly enough. But that's a tangent for another time. The point is, wisdom in both the New Testament and Old Testament seems to be, at the very least, the feminine aspect of God, right? If not God's explicit wife, which is what we believe in. Proverbs 8 speaks about wisdom being there when God created the earth, right? That I was there, I saw when he created the earth. So wisdom is speaking in this passage, and she's earlier identified as the tree of life. Proverbs 11, I forget, what's the verse I sent to you, David? Proverbs 11 something. It speaks again as wisdom. She is the tree of life. Now, here's something interesting. So I said before, Jeremiah accuses Deuteronomy, the book of the law, of being a forgery. There's a passage in Deuteronomy 4 that basically says, so we know that this wisdom tree of life was something that the reformers did not like. They did not like it. They were killing people for it. We see Abraham and all these people, they love Shaddai. They love wisdom. And then the Deuteronomists say, no, that's idolatrous. Shaddai is a demon. We don't like that. So in Deuteronomy 4, it says, you don't need wisdom. The law of the Lord will be your wisdom, right?
So just say, just follow the law. You don't need to seek wisdom for yourself. Just follow the law. That's all you need.
Now,
boy, that sounds familiar.
Now, pull up. I want you to, the NIV translation. This is the best one. Jeremiah 8:8 in the NIV version. So let's think about this. The Deuteronomist, we know this is a fact that we can prove Deuteronomy is a forgery. Every biblical scholar agrees on that. Now, pull up. It is the book of the law. That is what Deuteronomy is, the book of the law. It is, I believe that there was an original book of Deuteronomy that was real. That's my opinion. So you don't need wisdom. You only need the book of the law. I want you to keep that in mind as we read this verse. So what does Jeremiah say in Jeremiah 8:8? NIV version.
How did you come across this? Were you just reading all versions on the NIV version?
God inspired me to, right? Literally, I didn't even know who Dave Butler was when I first started researching it. I didn't know any of the Heavenly Mother stuff. I knew that Jehovah was once the Son of God, and that this was a thing that biblical scholars agree on. Jehovah, the son of El Elyon. And I wanted as many people to know about it as possible, and I felt inspired. The Holy Ghost told me to let more people know. Jehovah was once known as the Son of God. Another thing the Deuteronomists remove is a holiday. They remove it from the calendar called the Day of Atonement. You can read about it in Leviticus 16, but the King James translation is crap, right? It uses the word scapegoat instead of Azazel, which is a name of the leader of the fallen angels in Enoch, right? So if you research that, Azazel, it is a name for Satan. There is one goat, which is for the Lord, but the word for can also mean as the Lord. So one goat is Jehovah, one goat is Azazel. The high priest then puts the sins of Israel onto this goat instead of killing himself, because the high priest, he has the name of Jehovah on his forehead, but then a substitute is used instead, which is why the New Testament says when Jesus was killed, no substitute was used, right? So he puts the sins of Israel onto this goat, and he yells, Yahweh, and they all fall to the ground, just like in the garden, Jesus Christ said, I am, and they all fall to the ground. And then this goat, which represents Jehovah, is then killed for the sins of Israel, who in this time period, Jehovah was the son of the Most High God. We have the Deuteronomists literally removing from the calendar a holiday in which the Son of God atones for our sins. At the same time, Lehi is fleeing Jerusalem and being persecuted for believing in Christ.
But just to be clear, they still have Yom Kippur. That still is the Day of Atonement, and they still do the sins onto Azazel, and they flee it into the wood.
It's somewhat brought up, but it was actually removed from the calendar. So after the exile, with the Second Temple period, what we sort of have go on is some of the scriptures are altered, but then other people don't. So like I said, there was actual idolatry going on. I don't doubt that. But
so what was the NIV version of, was it Jeremiah 8:8? Can you read that?
Yes. Right. So keep that in mind. You don't need wisdom. You only need the law of the Lord. Now pull up that verse.
Well, we don't have it. Can you pull it up and read it?
Oh, I mean, I can, let me pull that up, actually. I sent it to David, I thought.
It's okay. David, do you have it? Can you read it? And I can pull it up as well.
Your phone is your...
Okay.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
This is important.
Okay.
So, Deuteronomy 4 says you don't need wisdom, which is the tree of life, the mother. Wisdom is the tree of life and the mother. Jeremiah 8:8 says, hold up. 8:8 NIV. Yeah, I thought I had saved.
And I have it too.
Yeah. How can you say we are wise, for we have the law of the Lord, when actually the lying pen of scribes has handled it falsely? So we have the prophet at that time period, Jeremiah, which we know his texts have been altered later on. They're written in a completely different style, a more secular style. Jeremiah writes in a poetic style. They're written in a later form of Hebrew. We have variations of Jeremiah where entire portions of those texts are missing.
So Jeremiah is saying that they have falsely done things to the law of the Lord, which is Deuteronomy.
Yes, right? Especially because Jeremiah, especially the emphasis on wisdom, which is the name of the mother. Deuteronomy says you don't need wisdom. The law of the Lord is wisdom. This very legalistic, what leads to the Pharisees' viewpoint, right? That I personally believe there was a real law of the Lord that was given, and it was changed and altered. And Jesus came and fulfilled the real law of the Lord. That's why you end up in scenarios like the Pharisees trying to get him to stone the adulterous woman, right? Because regardless, Jesus Christ isn't going to tell you to murder your family members for worshiping differently than you, right? Imagine like you have a sister who converted to Hinduism, and then Jesus just comes down and says, you have to stone her now. Come on, right? That's ridiculous. That's obviously not Jesus Christ. It's obviously not the religion of the New Testament. It's not the religion of the Book of Mormon that guarantees and protects people's religious liberty, even if they disagree.
So how do you line up when you hear something that's being taught on a smaller level? Shane said something of that sounds like today. When you hear apostles come out modern day saying, don't listen to any non-believers, don't take any of the, I mean, it's not the same thing, but it's starting to head down that path.
I agree. I think that there's different viewpoints from different apostles as well. Like in 2016, President Nelson straight up said, in the coming days, only those who have sought to be taught by the Lord directly, which I take that as visions or visitations from angelic beings, will be able to survive. I know Jeffrey R. Holland is very good with this too. I know people who know him personally. He's definitely a prophet. But what we have in the church is this cultural Protestantism, right? Where we are trying so hard to be like the Christians around us who are completely removed from the original religion that Jesus Christ taught, right? So I would say we have more in common with Eastern Orthodoxy and Catholicism than we do with American evangelical Christianity. But we try so hard to suck up and be like, oh no, we're not doing mystical rituals in the temple. It's sacred, not secret. No, it is secret. It's the mysteries and secrets of God. Unless you're initiated, you don't get to know about the Holy of Holies of the temple, right? It is a holy thing. It is a theosis ritual to become a son of God, right? And it's very interesting. Margaret Barker, so who she is she is a Methodist scholar who she kind of came at it from the same viewpoint as the early Catholics when they noticed these text variations, right? She was like, it seems like a lot of these changes remove explicit New Testament doctrine. Her thesis is that the New Testament does not come from the Old Testament. Her first book on that is called the Older Testament, which basically says that the book of the New Testament came from a different Old Testament than we have now. We have the apostles even speaking about this. We have the church fathers speaking about this. We have different versions of the Old Testament. Like the Samaritans, do you know who they are? They're the Israelites who were left behind after the exile, and they have a different version of the Bible than those who came back and followed in the footsteps of the Deuteronomists, altering the scriptures, right? That's why the Samaritans recognized Jesus Christ first, because they had more clear prophecies. And we have the church fathers outright saying, no, there were prophecies about Jesus Christ, explicitly removed. Here's a little interesting text variation from the Dead Sea Scrolls. So if you read Isaiah 7 in the Dead Sea Scrolls, Isaiah 7 is the prophecy of Jesus Christ's birth. The Lord will give you a sign, a virgin will give a birth. That's not what the Dead Sea Scrolls says. The Dead Sea Scrolls says, ask the mother of the Lord your God for a sign. A virgin will give birth. And we know that Shaddai gives blessings of fertility, right? So Heavenly Mother, that's likely, in my belief, who sends down spirits, who chooses their family, right? Which kind of makes sense. So it explicitly says, the mother of the Lord your God will give a sign, and that sign will be that a virgin gives birth to a child who's named Wonderful God, Everlasting Father, all this stuff, right?
So what do we do knowing this information? What do we do with the book of Deuteronomy? How do we handle it, and how do we view it now that we know that, maybe it's been altered or changed?
Honestly, I just ignore it. There's definitely good stuff in it. I think there was an original book of Deuteronomy. Like I said, Deuteronomy in the Dead Sea Scrolls, it mentions Jehovah as one of the sons of God. The little fragment we have of Deuteronomy 32, 8-9. And the Dead Sea Scrolls, they talk a lot about the sons of God, plural. It talks about the Melchizedek priests. It talks about all this very Mormon stuff. What we have to realize, and this is sort of Margaret Barker's thesis, is that people like the Essenes have more in common with Christianity than modern Judaism does. The writers of the Dead Sea Scrolls are very Christian in a lot of their writings. Interestingly enough, that you bring up the Book of Enoch. So there is a prophecy in the Book of Enoch called the Apocalypse of Weeks, right? So it describes the history of Jerusalem in terms of weeks. And the point in which it goes wrong is right after Isaiah ascends, the temple is corrupted, which is at the time of the Deuteronomist reforms. And the Book of Enoch also makes references to the tree of life being destroyed, which is the mother, and that one day the tree of life will return to the temple, which we see in Revelations, the tree of life in the temple. The description of the tree of life in the Book of Enoch is of a tree with white fruit, like Lehi sees in his vision, right? So again, we have Enoch. Enoch also accuses false priests at that time period of altering the scriptures. So yeah, maybe there was Baal worship going on. I'm not denying that. In fact, based on the statement about Melchizedek in the Book of Mormon, I would say that probably was going on. Because Kings, what it says that King Josiah was the greatest king ever, and there will be none other like him. And what does he do? Is he goes around murdering people he disagrees with. He destroys their holy places and then burns their bones in front of their children on the altars of their holy places, and just destroys all their stuff because apparently they were idolatrous, right? A lot of modern Protestant Christians would call us idolatrous and would do the same thing to our temples. And if you believe that God has a son, I'm sorry, King Josiah would have burned your bones on the altars of your temple. Sorry, that's what Deuteronomy says to do. If you believe God has a son or that God has a body. But here's the thing. I believe it's Alma talks about how Melchizedek was the greatest king. He uses the same words that's used to describe King Josiah. And not only was he the greatest king Israel has ever had, like Josiah's described as, he's the greatest king ever, and there will never be a king like him. It says that when Melchizedek's people grew wicked and idolatrous, he was patient with them, and he taught them repentance, and he brought them closer to God. So that says to me that there was genuine idolatry, and what happened was that King Josiah, not being called of God, as Amos would said, the Lord God will do nothing except he tells his servants the prophets. Josiah wasn't a prophet. He was a 12-year-old being manipulated by political figures. He takes things into his own hands, and they probably felt justified altering the law of the Lord to be like, we're getting rid of this bad stuff. I mean, how many times have you heard Protestant Christians talking about how they want to burn our writings, how they want to burn the Book of Mormon?
Right.
Because we're idolatrous. We're polytheistic. We're worshiping idols. We're doing all these terrible things. Funny enough, the Protestant reformers who went around smashing Catholic stuff and killing Catholics and all this stuff, they modeled themselves after King Josiah. Right? You will know them by their fruits. And it doesn't matter if someone is worshiping differently than you, as the Book of Mormon makes it clear. You do not have the right to destroy their stuff. In fact, recently in the news, there was a story about the church going to Japan and helping to pay money to restore these Shinto shrines, I believe it was. If we are meant to go and destroy the holy places of people whose worship we disagree with, why is the church now paying money to help people worship the way they desire? Why does the Book of Mormon say, not everyone's ready for the light of Christ, but I will give light unto all nations in their own way, regardless of their religion? That's an interesting question. Why is it that when Paul goes to preach to the Gentiles, he tells them, I will teach you about the God you worship without realizing it, to these pagan idolaters? He tells them, you are worshiping God in your own way. I will teach you the correct way to worship God. That's an interesting question. Why didn't Paul just smash their holy places and kill them?
Yeah, I mean, we even believe in our own articles of faith. We allow all men to worship how, where, what they may. I mean, that's our doctrine. And so we have to afford other people that same right as members of the church and honor the way that they're worshiping, as long as it doesn't infringe on, cause harm to somebody or on us. Yeah, I mean, that's our doctrine.
Yeah, I mean, two of these reformers, we know what their ideology is. We know the ideology of the Pharisees. Don't you think that the Pharisees being told, your God, Jehovah, has a father and a mother, that they would see that as idolatrous and kill people for it? That's exactly what we see happening in Deuteronomy, right? Not in Deuteronomy, in the Deuteronomistic literature. And again,
well, I think that's also why in our same articles of faith we say we believe the Bible to be the Word of God, as far as it is translated correctly, because when we put these articles of faith together, we knew that there were things that had been altered from the Bible, and it sounds like, and Bible scholars agree, that Deuteronomy was altered, that things were taken out, especially the feminine side of the equation of God was completely taken out.
Yeah, and it's very interesting because even within the historical books, the Book of Chronicles has so many things in it in the history of Israel that the Book of Kings would have seen as idolatrous. It's also interesting because what does the Deuteronomistic literature portray about the way a country ought to be ran? It says that the kings are the best. The judges, they were a failure. The judges suck, right? They were a failure. The kings are the greatest. The kings need to take authority and kill a bunch of people. And then the Book of Mormon warns about the kingsmen explicitly. It says, we will establish judges so that the kingsmen and the secret combinations don't take control of our government. Don't you think that the people writing the Book of Mormon, they're talking about religious liberty, they're talking about worshiping as you please, even if you disagree with it, and not allowing kings to have that much power? Don't you think it's for a reason? It's because they were victims of this, authoritarian kingdom taking things way too far, saying anything that was mystical or esoteric in the temple, we will destroy it, right? And we see many of these same things. I have a friend that I know. He is an Anglican. He's into very esoteric things. After learning about the Deuteronomist reforms, after reading, so here's a Margaret Barker book that she did specifically on the deity of Christ. It's called The Great Angel, A Study on Israel's Second God. It's about, how many pages? Like, I want to say 400 pages. No, it's like 300 pages. And it goes into a lot of the evidence that Jehovah was once seen as the Son of God, and that Christianity was a restoration of this belief, right? If you look at the New Testament, Jesus Christ is never called the Son of the Lord. He is never called the Son of Jehovah. He is called Jehovah. He is called I Am. He is called the Son of the Most High, which is El Elyon. He is called the Son of the Father, which is a title for El Elyon. El Elyon was the Father of gods, right? We see that throughout the New Testament, and then we see Paul saying there are many that are called gods and lords, both in heaven and on earth. Now, that's not talking about idols, because I don't think that there are idols in heaven, do you? But to us, there is one God, one Elohim, El Elyon, the Father, and one Lord, Jehovah, Jesus Christ. Right? That doctrine's very plainly in the New Testament. Again, if you look at, I believe it is Hebrews 2, that's the one where it calls us, Jesus Christ's brothers and sisters. One of them, it says it many times throughout the New Testament. But if you read the Hebrew, it speaks of, in the beginning, in the assembly of the holy ones, God was preaching salvation through the Lord. So it is showing a distinguishing between God Most High and the Lord, because the Lord is who it is being preached through. And then later in the Psalm, Jesus Christ says, this is paraphrasing here, I will preach your salvation to my brothers and sisters in the assembly of the holy ones. Or in English, it says in the church. But the assembly of the holy ones, that is the pre-existence, that is the divine council, right? Which explains why when Jesus Christ quotes the ye are gods one, he uses it to refer to us, because that's a divine council scene where Yahweh, most scholars agree that in Psalms 82, Yahweh and El are two distinct persons, and that El is overseeing this divine council, and Yahweh is being appointed to judge the other gods in the council. Now, who is our judge? Jesus Christ, right? And maybe this was altered in certain ways, but Jesus Christ, when the Pharisees, it's also very interesting the language that him and the Pharisees use. He declares himself to be the I am, and the Pharisees say, how dare you make yourself God? And then he replies by saying, are you mad because I say I'm the Son of God? So the Pharisees are seeing the I am as the Most High God. Jesus is seeing the I am as the Son of God. And then he quotes, is it not written in your law, I said, ye are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High? Right?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because that was what I've been thinking in my mind the whole entire time, is like they used this same doctrine to get him to the council that got him crucified. They were looking for a way, and when they finally heard him say the I am thing, they were like, gotcha, blasphemy, we can kill you.
Yeah, and again, if you look at Psalms 89, Jehovah is identified as one of the sons of God. This is something that was missed in the scrubbing, but he's identified as one of the sons of God. It then identifies Jehovah as the king of Israel who sits on the throne. And then you have a scene of David being seated on the throne and anointed by oil, and God speaks. Now, God, who is speaking, narrating this, is distinct from Yahweh, because he's been speaking of Yahweh in the third person the entire time. But he says to David that he will make him his firstborn as he is seated on the throne of Yahweh. Right? There are also various scenes throughout a lot of the Davidic sort of scriptures where when David sits on the throne, it says they worship the king and the Lord. Right? So when David, in this ceremony, think of how we take upon ourselves the name of Christ. Think of how our temple garments kind of represent the tetragrammatron. Right?
Yeah.
Think of all that stuff we take upon ourselves when we wear our garments. And in the Apocrypha, there is a lot of mention about garments. Interestingly enough, the word for atonement means to cover, like with a cloth, right? We have the apocryphal Adam and Eve, where Adam and Eve are given garments to protect them after they fall. We have all these apocryphal texts like the Ascension of Isaiah, the Apocrypha of Moses, where it speaks about being clothed in the garments of glory. It redeems you from the fall. Margaret Barker, in her book, Temple Theology. Now, I think everyone who's watching this video, it's only $10 on Amazon, get Temple Theology and Introduction. It's so good. She makes a comment about how this passage in the Book of Enoch represents some of that liturgy that they would do in the temples. And she makes a note about how Enoch is anointed with oil, and then Michael comes to him and dresses him in garments of glory And then he sees himself transformed into an angel, into a son of God, and he sits upon a throne. And we also know Enoch in the book of Enoch, when he becomes an angel, he gets a new name. He becomes Metatron, right? So we see that, and Margaret Barker's commentary is, this represents the Theosis, which means to become divine, rituals that they used to do in the temples, right? So we have some sort of ritual that was done where, and this is something the Deuteronomists didn't like. We also find this in the Gnostic Gospels where they go into the bridal chamber, the Holy of Holies, and a man and woman are dressed in garments together. And you see that happening, and she's like, that's an ancient ritual that the Christians and Israelites would do to become sons of God, right? So we see that same thing when David is anointed with oil and seated upon the throne. That is sort of an endowment, and he is taking upon himself the name of God, the name of Christ.
Gotcha. It sounds like you've spent a ton of time reading a lot of apocryphal writings. How do you determine, as you sift through all these different writings, how do you determine, oh, look, we got 3 Latter-day Chads right now?
I think I'm starting to see what he's talking about, because I
got to have the glasses on. It's part of the shtick. Yeah. You don't have the glasses on, you cannot see. Let he who has eyes, let him see. Now
always
we can see. So
I think
have you read you've read tons of apocryphal writings. How do you kind of, as you sift through for other people that are trying to determine what apocryphal writings to look at? We mentioned the Nag Hammadi library. How do you determine what is good and what is not good as you read all these apocryphal works?
Well, I think first it's important. So the Book of Mormon is how we have the Book of Mormon for a reason, right? It was prophesied that more scriptures would come from the earth. We have that quote of Dallin H. Oaks saying the Dead Sea Scrolls was an example of this prophecy being fulfilled. Now, Dave Butler, he has a book that everyone should look into about the Book of Mormon in the context of First Temple Judaism. It's called In the Language of Adam. Now, it basically talks not a super lot about the Deuteronomist reforms, but this temple symbolism in the Book of Mormon. Because here's the thing. Everyone talks about the condemnation of the church. And they talk about it like, oh, it's because of polygamy or something. Sure, maybe. I don't know. I don't really care about polygamy. It's about the Book of Mormon. All right? In the Doctrine and Covenants, it says, because we have taken lightly the things which we have received. And it also specifies until we not only read the Book of Mormon, but live it. Right? The Book of Mormon is trying to tell us something, and most people don't get it. This is not just another book like the Bible. It is deeply coded in temple symbolism. The fact that we literally have it opening up with all these scenes from the Holy of Holies that the Deuteronomists would have seen as blasphemy. I mean, Isaiah would have been seen as blasphemous from the Deuteronomist. He opens up seeing visions of stars and the Lord sitting on his throne, right? They would have killed Isaiah. But every page of the Book of Mormon is in temple language, right? It's not just a straight up history of the Nephites, and it's not like the Bible necessarily either. So we see various times like where the events that happen in the Book of Mormon is described in temple terms. Like they take a journey somewhere and it is in a 3-course movement, right? Where they start at one place, they go to a second place, and then they go to a third place where it sort of represents entering the presence of God.
People have broken down the Jaredites traveling in the boats as like an endowment type scene.
It is.
Like that's
right?
one of
It's not just the vision of the tree of life is an endowment too for both Nephi and especially Lehi. Because the tree of life, it represents in Margaret Barker's theology, right? There's something that I'm going to want to go through and read before the end of the video. If you guys can have it ready to pull up, it's on BYU's website. I want you to search up Margaret Barker Joseph Smith, because she did all this study. She's talking about the tree of life. She's talking about
and she's a Methodist. She's not an LDS person,
right? She's talking about all this stuff, and that it happened at the time period of the Book of Mormon. And then when Mormons start getting a hold of her, she is just shocked to read the Book of Mormon. She's like, I never expected to see a description of a tree bearing white fruit that is compared to the mother of the Lord anywhere else. But there it is in the Book of Mormon. right? One comment she makes in this paper that she wrote about the Book of Mormon. So if you look up Margaret Barker, Book of Mormon, and have that ready to put on the screen for the end of the video.
I'm here. I got it right now, but it's a huge report. Where do you want me to go to it?
Just like have it ready on standby. But another thing she says is that the Jesus of the Book of Mormon is the Jehovah of the Old Testament, which is exactly what you would expect in unaltered text by the Deuteronomists, right? Here's a little thing. So I forget the guy's name. It's like Amalekiah or Amulek or something. Like Alma and this other guy, they're talking, Zeezrom, I think it was. They're talking to this sort of antichrist guy who's interrogating them about Jesus Christ. They're trying to get Alma to mess up, and it specifies that in the text. So when they ask, is Christ the eternal Father? Want to know what Alma says? Yea, the eternal Father of heaven and earth. So it's asking, you're claiming Christ is Jehovah, and there's probably still some of this confusion between Father and Son going on. Is he the Father? He's the Father of heaven and earth. He's the creator of heaven and earth. That's what it's saying. If you really look at the Book of Mormon, every single line is very, very careful Hebraisms and things that could not have been known by Joseph Smith. It's so crazy, especially when you understand this First Temple theology.
And I think that's the importance of the Book of Mormon, right? Knowing that the Deuteronomists had gone in and things have been altered, you needed a second witness to bring in those things that were lost, and hence the primary role of the Book of Mormon to kind of straighten those things out. And I think that's what David Butler has kind of put together in his book, right?
Yeah. And it's very interesting. Like Margaret Barker herself, she talks about how the goal of the pre-Deuteronomist temple was to return to the presence of God, and things in the temple were meant to trigger visions and basically achieve the second comforter. That's what she says. It was about learning to see the face of God. And when they would enter into the temples, the priests would see themselves as the incarnations of angelic beings. That is one thing she talks about. It's like they saw themselves as these pre-existent divine beings when they would be dressed in their garments in the temple, which it's very interesting that when we leave the temple, we don't have our full robes on, but on the inside of our clothes, we have a part of it. So even though we are in the flesh, on the inside, we are still divine. Think about that.
Cool.
Well, hey, I got a question about this, because I didn't study the Deuteronomist, but I came upon this whole section of, there's like 4 scriptures in the original 1830 Book of Mormon that were changed in the 1837 Book of Mormon. And it's this exact same doctrine. So like, I'll give the 4.
Nephi chapter 11, right?
Nephi 11:18, the original said, behold, this is the virgin which thou seest is the mother of God. In the current edition, it says the mother of the Son of God. In 1 Nephi 11:21, it says, the angel said unto them, behold, the Lamb of God, yea, even the eternal Father. And it changes to even the Son of the eternal Father. And again, 11:32 and 1 Nephi 13, all of those changes were changes from the eternal Father to the Son of the eternal Father.
Yeah. It's very interesting because here's the thing. I think that's absolutely done on purpose because people didn't understand the theology or whatnot. But here's how I view it. A lot of people, they see the New Testament as God sending his Son down to reveal certain things on this final revelation. That's not what the New Testament is. The New Testament is God himself coming down, the creator of the heavens and earth, the Father of the heavens and the earth, coming down and revealing his Father to us. Think about that. Jehovah is the God of the Old Testament.
Wow.
Jesus is the God of the Old Testament. He was ever present. He is the Lord God, right? And then he comes down to restore the original religion of his father, of the Melchizedek religion, the priests of El Elyon, the Most High God, right? The God of Israel, the Holy One of Israel, is the Son of the Most High God. That is the most important thing, because you can disagree about the Heavenly Mother stuff if you want. I don't think the Asherah, Shaddai stuff is what's most important. What's most important is that Jehovah was once known as the Son of God, and that was removed from the Old Testament, and it is restored in the New Testament and in the Book of Mormon.
Well, with that, we're gonna wrap up with that, because that is the most important thing, that we understand, that Jesus Christ is the Son of El Elyon, or our eternal Father, and he plays obviously the key role in helping us return back to our Heavenly Father. So, Latter-day Chad, thank you so much for this conversation on the Deuteronomist.
One more thing. So, you did say there was something you wanted me to talk about, right? Which is kind of related.
Yes. So we're gonna have to do that on another podcast, and I want to spend I just want to set up a whole time to discuss the temple, because I think we're going to get into, and you just touched on a couple of things, and I think we just need to do a whole other show on the endowment of power, on your experience getting your endowment and what that was like. And so we'll do that in another episode, as we're approaching an hour and a half. We like to keep our videos between hour and a half. So we'll end that here, and we're going to definitely have you back on and do another show. For a young man, I'm totally impressed with your ability to remember information and to find information. It's really cool, actually, to see young guys like you going deep, not being stuck on the tic-tac or whatever it is and getting sidetracked, but you're actually, trying to have your second comforter, have your calling and election made sure, have all these, these are deep doctrines that most kids at 22, 23 years old, they're trying to figure out which chick they're going to go on a date with and if they're going to swipe left or right, You're really diving deep, trying to understand who you are, what your mission is. So I applaud you with that. But we'll go ahead and wrap up, unless Trevor, David, you guys have any final thoughts? Okay.
No.
Well, I love the glasses. It's his shtick. It is Latter-day Chad. For myself, I'm Shane Baldwin. For Trevor Keys and David Douglas, and our guest, Latter-day Chad, thank you for joining in. Make sure you like and subscribe to this video, or to our channel, and like this video. And we will see you next time on the Key of David podcast.
In the heart of Zion, where the truth shines bright, we gather the stories, bring the shadows to light. From the ancient prophets to the visions anew, we're here to explore, to learn, to renew. Zion Media, where the journey begins, unlocking the mysteries, where the Spirit wins. From the mountains of Mentina to the city of light, we're guiding the seekers through the darkest night. With the words of the prophets echoing in our soul, we dive into the scriptures, seeking to make us whole. From the plains of America to the temples on high, we uncover the secrets as the eagles fly by. Zion Media, where the journey begins, unlocking the mysteries, where the Spirit wins. From the mountains of Mentina to the city of light, we're guiding the seekers through the darkest night. With the words of the prophets echoing in our soul, we dive into the scriptures, seeking to make us whole. From the plains of America to the temples on high, we uncover the secrets as the eagles fly by. Nothing will be withheld from them for those who seek and strive. With hearts full of truth, we rise again. Zion Media, keeping the faith alive. Zion Media, where the journey begins, mysteries, where the Spirit wins. From the mountains of Antioch to the city of light, we're guiding the seekers through the darkest night. Join us in the quest, where truth is our guide. In the arms of Zion, we stand side by side. Zion Media, where the story is told, bringing forth the wisdom, both ancient and bold. Join us in the quest, where truth is our guide. In the arms of Zion, we stand side by side. Zion Media, where the story is told, bringing forth the wisdom, both ancient and bold.